The wind carried the scent of dust and distant rain across the Tanzanian plain as Dr. Amina Rahman knelt in the excavation pit, brushing aside the last veil of sediment from the fragment that had stopped her heart moments earlier. For a moment she could hear nothing but her own breath, slow and uneven, rising and falling with the certainty that she was touching something that should not, by any current understanding of science, exist in this layer of earth. The sun hovered low on the horizon, its orange light slipping like molten metal across the ridges of dirt, illuminating the bone with an eerie glow as if time itself were remembering a face that had long forgotten the sun. She lifted the fragment carefully, holding it between her fingers, and turned it toward the fading light. A jawbone delicate, curved, almost human but not human. The molars were small, too small, but the shape of the mandible was wrong for anything she knew. Not Homo erectus, not Neanderthal, not early Homo sapiens, something in between, something older, something that had no name. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the discovery settle into her chest. Her father's voice drifted through her memory stories he told her as a child beneath the flickering glow of lantern light. There were others before us, he used to say. People who walked the land long before our bones were ever dreamed into existence. People whose names have been forgotten by the wind. At the time, she had thought he meant folklore, spirits, stories meant to soothe the mind of an imaginative child. But even then, she had felt something deeper, something that tugged at her curiosity with the insistence of a whispered truth. Now, as she held the fragment in her hand, she wondered if her father had somehow sensed what she would one day find. Her assistant Rafi scrambled into the pit, nearly tripping over the tools scattered across the dirt. "Amina," he said breathlessly, "you found something, didn't you? I saw your face." She didn't trust her voice, so she simply extended the tiny bone fragment in her palm. Rafi leaned in, adjusting his glasses, blinking rapidly. Then his words came out in a whisper, as though afraid the desert air might echo them too loudly. "What is that?" She swallowed. "Something impossible." Rafi stared at her, then at the bone again. "Should I call the team?" "Should know," she said, quickly. "Not yet. Let's be sure first." She knew what would happen if she announced an unidentified hominin discovery prematurely. The university would swarm in, government supervisors would interfere, and worse, much worse, Dr. Victor Hale would hear about it before she had enough evidence to keep him from dismissing it as another misinterpretation born from emotional enthusiasm, his favorite accusation whenever she challenged his established theories. She turned the bone over again, her fingers trembling. This fragment had survived nearly 200 millennia. It had traveled across time, through shifting sands and the crushing weight of Earth to land in her hands. It deserved more than rushed conclusions. Amina set it gently into a padded container and took a long breath. "We'll document it quietly. For now, this stays between us." Rafi nodded, though she could see the questions brimming beneath his obedience. Excitement hummed around him like static. Discoveries did that. They turned grown scientists into children marveling at impossible things. As they climbed out of the pit, the camp lay before them in the dimming light. Pale tents staked into the red soil tables cluttered with tools and half-cleaned fossils, and the soft glow of laptop screens flickering like artificial fireflies. Workers chattered near the perimeter, their silhouettes framed against the wide African horizon. The world felt vast, ancient, and fragile. Amina walked toward the lab tent, the container pressed to her chest. With each step, her heartbeat grew louder, like a drum echoing from a distant era. She entered the tent, switched on the overhead lamp, and placed the container on the examination table. The bone sat under the white light like an artifact stolen from a dream. She reached for her calipers and began measuring the bone's features with steady hands, falling into the methodical trance that scientific work often brought her. But with each measurement, her brows pulled tighter, her breath hitching. None of it aligned with known hominin species from this region. Not in this time period. Not in this geological layer. She pulled up comparative models on her laptop and placed the bone fragment beside the screen. The mismatch was undeniable. The tent flap rustled, and her team's genetic specialist, Leanne, stepped inside. She paused when she saw Amina hunched over the table, illuminated by the lamp's stark glow. "You're working late," Leanne said softly. "Found something interesting." Amina hesitated. Leanne was trustworthy, brilliant, and loyal, but every extra person who knew increased the risk of Hale learning too soon. Still, Amina's excitement and fear were too much to contain. "Come look," she said quietly. Leanne approached, leaned over the table, and froze. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "That's not from anything I recognize." "I know," Amina replied. "Is it real?" Amina looked at her sharply. "You think I staged a fossil?" No, Leanne said, shaking her head. I meant, is it from a species we know? Because if it's not, they both knew the implication. Amina's hands trembled slightly. Run a preliminary scan. Quietly, Leanne nodded and gathered the equipment. While she set up, Amina stepped outside to breathe. The night had settled fully across the savannah, stars scattered like ancient memories across the sky. The wind was cooler now, gentle against her skin. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing thoughts. A phone buzzed in her pocket. She frowned. It was late. Only one person would call her at this hour with no regard for time zones. She answered cautiously. Dr. Hale, his voice slid through the speakers, smooth, polished, arrogant. Amina, I hear you've been digging deeper than your approved strata. Care to explain? Her stomach tightened. Someone had reported her activity. Someone in her camp. I'm following the sediment layer, she said evenly. As always. You always were fond of bending definitions, Hale murmured. Listen, I want you to be careful not to misinterpret preliminary findings. It would be a shame for you to repeat the unfortunate enthusiasm of your earlier years. Every word was a disguised threat. A reminder of the time he'd sabotaged her research to protect his own. Amina forced her voice to remain steady. If I find anything significant, you'll be notified through official channels. See that I am, Hale said. Good night, Doctor. The line clicked dead. Amina stared at the phone, her pulse thundering. He knew something. He always knew something. But he didn't know enough, not yet. She returned inside the tent. Leanne turned to her, face pale. Amina, she said softly. The DNA scan picked up something unusual. Amina leaned in. What kind of unusual? It doesn't match Homo sapiens. Or Neanderthal, or Denisovan, but it's close. Very close. There's a pattern here I've never seen. Amina felt a chill ripple through her. Is it contamination? No. It's clean, and there's more. The mitochondrial marker's tiny, but they suggest this individual might have had genetic overlap with early humans, but in a way that doesn't match any known dataset. Amina's throat tightened. So it's new. Leanne nodded slowly. Yes, a new branch. A forgotten one. Rafi rushed into the tent, wide-eyed, breathless. Amina, you need to see this. What happened? She asked sharply. He motioned frantically. It's in the pit. We found more. Amina didn't wait. She sprinted after him, her boots kicking up dust as she crossed the camp. Workers had gathered near the edge of the excavation site, their murmurs rising with urgency. The floodlights cast sharp beams across the pit as she climbed down the ladder. There, near where the first bone had rested, something glimmered faintly under the glare of the lights. A small stone tool, beautifully shaped or advanced for a species with such small features, and yet undeniably crafted by the same hands that left the jaw fragment. Beside it lay a tiny tooth, preserved almost perfectly. A child's tooth. Amina froze. A sharp ache pierced her chest. A child from a species no one had ever known. A child who had lived, breathed, laughed, cried, and disappeared into extinction without leaving even a name behind. She crouched and lifted the tooth gently, her eyes stinging. It was so small, so heartbreakingly fragile. She imagined the child who had lost it, what their face had looked like, what their voice sounded like, how their mother might have soothed them during the night. She whispered, barely audible, "You were here, you mattered." Rafi exhaled shakily. "This is huge, isn't it?" Amina nodded slowly. "This changes everything." As she stood, the wind brushed across the excavation site, carrying the faintest echo of something ancient. For a moment, she felt as if unseen eyes were watching her from the darkness, watching over the bones, over their secrets. The floodlights flickered. In the shadows beyond the perimeter, a figure moved just enough for her to sense, not enough to see. She narrowed her eyes, heart beating faster. Someone was watching their discovery, someone who should not be there. And in that moment, Amina understood with chilling clarity, the bones weren't the only thing that should not exist. Someone else knew what she had found. Someone who would do anything to stop her from uncovering the truth. And the night pressed closer around her, as if holding its breath for what would come. Dawn arrived with a pale, muted glow, spreading over the Tanzanian plain like a soft whisper of light. The excavation site stirred slowly as workers stepped out of their tents, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing sleep from their eyes. But Amina had not slept. She hadn't even tried. She sat in the lab tent all night. The child's tooth and stone tool laid gently on a padded cloth before her. Their presence felt almost sacred, survivors of a world erased by time and memory. She traced the edge of the stone tool with her fingertip, marveling at its precision. Whoever had shaped it possessed intelligence, dexterity, intention. It wasn't crude like early Homo habilis tools, nor did it match the sophisticated blades of Homo sapiens. It was something in between, something new, something old, something that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for its story to be told. The tent flap rustled, and Rafi entered carrying 2 steaming cups. "You look like you haven't blinked in 6 hours, he said gently. "I haven't," Amina replied, accepting the tea. "These objects, they don't belong to anything in the known timeline." Rafi lowered himself onto the stool beside her. "What are you thinking?" She stared at the stone tool, remembering her father's stories again. "I'm thinking that we've only ever understood half the human story, and the other half is hidden in bones we haven't found. Voices that were never allowed to be heard." Rafi nodded slowly. "We'll help them speak." Amina smiled faintly. "I hope we're ready for what they have to say." Before she could say more, Leanne burst through the entrance. She was out of breath, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Amina, you need to see the genetic readout." Amina felt her pulse quicken. "What did you find?" Leanne held out her tablet. "Not a match to any known hominin, but that's not the strange part." Her voice trembled. "There are traces of overlapped tiny markers suggesting this species shared DNA with early Homo sapiens. Not in the way Neanderthals did. Something different." Amina frowned. "Explain." "Think of it like a faint echo," Leanne said. "A whisper carried across millennia in our blood. We're not directly related, but something in our genetic past remembers them. Barely, as if our species brushed past them, perhaps even coexisted with them for a brief moment in time." Amina felt a shiver run through her. "How is that possible?" Leanne shook her head. "We don't know, but they weren't isolated. They didn't disappear quietly in a corner of the world. Their genetic traces suggest a broader presence, maybe even interactions we haven't imagined." The tent felt suddenly too small, too full of air charged with revelation. Amina stepped outside, letting the morning breeze cool her feverish thoughts. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, and for the first time, she imagined it as it truly was alive, with multiple human species walking side by side, leaving footprints that overlapped, diverged, and converged again. She closed her eyes, and the world shifted around her imagination. She saw the past unfold across shifting landscapes. A tall, long-legged Homo erectus striding across an open savanna, carrying a firebrand to light the night. Neanderthals in Europe huddling beside a cave fire, their broad faces illuminated with warmth and grief as they mourned a lost child. Denisovans in wind-carved mountains, crafting necklaces from animal teeth. Small-bodied Homo floresienses on Flores Island, navigating darkness with torches made from palm bark. Homo luzonensis, climbing trees in Luzon's dense forests, their bodies nimble, almost weightless. So many worlds, so many lives, all gone, yet not entirely. Their traces lay in the soil, in fragments of bone, in the silent echo of DNA, and maybe, just maybe, in stories told by fathers who said they passed down whispers from their ancestors. She opened her eyes as Rafi approached her again. "What do we do next?" "We dig," she said, "and we keep digging until we find enough to silence every critic." As if summoned by her thought, a voice behind them said, "That may take a lifetime." Dr. Ramon. Amina stiffened. She turned slowly to see Dr. Victor Hale standing at the edge of the camp, flanked by 2 university representatives and a local official. His presence was like a cold shadow in the morning light. He wore his usual immaculate attire, crisp shirt, neatly pressed trousers, and a smug expression painted across his face. "Hale," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "You weren't expected." "I'm not here for pleasantries," Haley replied, stepping closer. "I'm here because I heard rumors. Rumors of an unidentified fossil. Rumors of unsanctioned deeper excavation. Rumors of enthusiasm outpacing discipline." Amina crossed her arms. "We found a bone fragment, that's all." Hale smirked. "You say all, as if I don't remember your history of seeing patterns where none exist." Rafi stepped forward, bristling with respect. Sir Hale held up a hand. "Save your indignation. I'm here to ensure that real science is conducted here, not fantasies." Amina's jaw tightened. "We are conducting real science. Then you won't mind if I take a look?" Hale brushed past her and entered the lab tent. Amina followed, dread settling like a stone in her stomach. Hale examined the bone fragment under the lamp with cold disinterest. "It's small, hardly conclusive. Likely Homo erectus, worn by erection. Your imagination is doing most of the work." "It's not erectus," Amina said. "The mandible curvature is irrelevant," Hale snapped. "Until a full skeleton is found, you have nothing." He turned to the officials. "Shut down all digs below layer 4. Dr. Rahman is not authorized to excavate there." Amina's breath caught. "You can't do that. That layer is where the evidence lies." Exactly, Hale said quietly. Which is why it must be handled properly. She realized with a sickening jolt that he wasn't just trying to control the excavation, he was trying to bury it. If you interfere with this discovery, she said, her voice trembling with anger, you're not protecting science. You're protecting your legacy. Hale stepped close, his eyes sharp. My legacy is built on facts. Yours seems built on facts, yours seems built on fairy tales of forgotten humans. He left the tent, leaving the air heavy with hostility. Leanne exhaled shakily. He's going to try to discredit everything before we even begin. Amina sank onto her stool. Then we gather evidence faster than he can bury it. The next week became a blur of frantic work. Every spare moment, every ounce of energy went into excavation, analysis, and documenting their findings. Each bone fragment, each tool, each layer of sediment was recorded meticulously. The deeper they went, the more signs of the unknown species appeared. A rib fragment here, a knuckle bone there. Faint impressions of footprints hardened into sediment. At night, Amina's dreams filled with visions of the past. She saw the unknown species moving through ancient landscapes shorter than Homo sapiens, but agile with quick, darting movements. She saw a clan of them gathered beneath a rock shelter, carving tools, tending wounds, comforting their children. They were not beasts, they were people. One night, while poring over DNA results, Amina felt a sudden heaviness in her chest. She stared at the tiny markers, the faint connections between early humans and the unknown species. What happened to you? She whispered to the data. Why did you disappear? Did we drive you out? Did the earth swallow you? Did you die quietly, forgotten even by the wind? No answer came, only the quiet hum of the generator and the pulse of her own heartbeat. Another week passed before another anonymous message reached her inbox. You're not the first to find them. Others saw the signs, others were silenced. Dig deeper. The truth is below you. Don't trust Hale. Attached was a photo. A deep chamber beneath the pit, walls lined with ancient sediment, something buried within. Amina stared at the image, her breath catching. She had never seen this chamber, never authorized its excavation, which meant someone had been digging before her. Someone had tried to hide it. She closed the laptop slowly, the weight of the revelation settling over her like dust. They were close, so close to uncovering a forgotten chapter of humanity. But something else was close too, something watching them, something that wanted the truth to stay buried. The night wrapped itself around the camp, silent and dark, as Amina sat alone with the bones and the ghosts of the past. She could feel their presence now, not as spirits, but as echoes of lives torn from history. They were there, waiting, pleading, tell our story, don't let us vanish again. And Amina, with a heart full of fear and determination, whispered back, I won't. Night settled over the research camp with the heavy quiet of a world older than memory. Malik sat alone at the long wooden table outside the main tent, the desert wind brushing sand against his boots. A single lantern flickered beside him, throwing amber light across the scattered notebooks, sketches, and audio equipment. The camp generators hummed softly, a thin reminder of civilization on the edge of a prehistoric abyss. He had spent hours listening to the recordings he made inside the chamber, clicks, echoes, a few scratchy patterns that sounded almost like breathing. None of it made sense. But one segment kept drawing him back, a faint sequence of rhythmic taps, spaced unevenly, as though something was communicating. He replayed it again. Tap, pause, tap tap, longer pause, tap. It wasn't natural, it wasn't random, it felt deliberate. Maya joined him quietly, brushing her hair back beneath her scarf. She watched the lantern light ripple across his troubled expression. You're still on that same clip, she said gently, lowering herself onto the bench beside him. Tell me you hear it too, Malik murmured, without looking up. He pressed the headphones against her hands. She listened, eyes narrowing as the taps repeated. When the clip ended, she slipped the headphones off and placed them on the table. It doesn't sound like movement, she said. Not an animal, but it doesn't sound like any known tool rhythm either. Malik nodded grimly. It matches nothing, not coded signals, not environmental echoes, nothing, except, she prompted. He hesitated before answering. Except language. A chill moved across Maya's shoulders, despite the warm night air. Malik, you're not suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything, he interrupted. I'm telling you what the data suggests. But Maya could see it clearly, the spark of fear, but also wonder, burning in his eyes. Malik was not a man given to dramatics. If he thought the sounds were intentional, then something truly extraordinary sat beneath the desert floor. Before she could reply, Leora stormed out of the main tent holding a printout. You two need to see this, she said breathlessly. Now. She slapped the paper down on the table. It was the 3D reconstruction of the unknown skull from the chamber, but now complete, corrected, and refined. The face staring back at them didn't belong to any known species. Its brow was steep, but the jaw was slender. The nasal cavities suggested a capacity for complex vocalization. The skull was large, too large for Neanderthals, yet proportioned differently than Homo sapiens, a species that shouldn't exist. Leora, Maya whispered. This isn't a hybrid, is it? No, Leora said, shaking her head. This isn't Denisovan, not Neanderthal, not sapien, something else entirely. Moloch's hands tightened into fists. Which means, he said, we didn't just find a new species, we found one advanced enough to build tools, carve symbolic chambers, and possibly communicate. Maya's breath caught. Maliktha, sound pattern. Are you saying that this species might have spoken? He finished. Yes. The lantern flickered between them, as though reacting to the weight of his words. Leora leaned in, dropping her voice. There's more. The bone dates. They're younger than expected. Much younger. Maya blinked. How young? 5,000 years. The desert seemed to fall silent. That's impossible, Malik said, though his voice trembled. 5,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had already spread across continents. If these others existed, then why is there no trace, no legends, no fossils, nothing? Leora folded her arms tightly. Unless someone erased them. The ideas settled over the table like a shroud. Maya stared into the darkness beyond the camp lights, her voice barely a whisper. But who could erase a whole species? No, Malik said slowly. Not erase, hide. Before they could continue, a sudden metallic clatter rang out in the distance. All three of them shot to their feet. The sound echoed from the excavation pit. Malik grabbed a flashlight and started running. When they reached the pit, the guards stood nervously at the edge, weapons drawn but shaking. What happened? Malik demanded. One of the guards pointed down with a trembling hand. The support scaffold had collapsed, smashed inwards, as though struck by something heavy from below. Dust drifted upward from the dark hole. No one went down there, the guard insisted. We were watching, it just fell. Malik waved the beam of his flashlight over the shattered boards. His pulse hammered in his ears. Something wasn't right. Check the perimeter, he ordered. Now, as the guards scattered, Maya knelt near the pit, staring downward. Do you feel that? She murmured. Malik stepped beside her. Feel what? But then he heard it too. No, felt it, a faint vibration beneath the earth. A rhythmic pulse, like a distant heartbeat. Tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. The same pattern from his recording. Maya stood slowly, her face pale. Malik, that's coming from inside the chamber. The vibration grew slightly stronger, rattling the pebbles at their feet. Leora backed away. It's impossible. The chamber is sealed. No one could be inside. Malik stared into the darkness, his voice hollow. Or maybe we aren't the first ones to disturb what's down there. The ground gave a sudden, sharp tremor, just enough to make the sand quiver. The sound stopped. Silence pressed in from all sides. Then, from the deep black inside the excavation pit, something echoed up to them. A single, deliberate tap. Leora stumbled back, covering her mouth. Maya whispered what none of them wanted to say aloud. We're not alone down there. Malik forced himself to kneel again, staring into the pit as if trying to see through the darkness. But all he could see was the trembling light of his flashlight and the emptiness swallowing it whole. He felt something ancient stir beneath the ground, an awareness, a presence awakened by their intrusion, a species long gone, or one that never truly left. The desert wind rose sharply, scattering sand like whispers around them. Malik closed his eyes, the truth beginning to form. The chamber wasn't just a burial site, it was a warning, and someone or something had begun answering. The morning sun crept over the dunes like a slow, watchful eye. The camp felt different, hushed, unsettled, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Malik hadn't slept. None of them had. They sat together in the briefing tent, the night's tremor still echoing through their nerves. On the table lay the reconstructed skull, a stack of seismic printouts, and Moloch's audio recorder. The rhythmic taps had not returned, but the memory of that final deliberate knock had carved itself into all their minds. Malik paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. We have two possibilities, he said. Either the chamber is shifting and causing these sounds unlikely, or something in there is capable of producing them. Leora shook her head. Bones don't tap, artifacts don't tap, and the chamber hasn't shifted in thousands of years. The readings are steady. Maya stared at the table, tracing her fingers along the skull's curved ridge. Then we have to consider the possibility that we disturbed something that wasn't ready to be found. Leora exhaled sharply. You're suggesting there's a living organism in a sealed chamber from 5,000 years ago? No, Malik said. but there might be a mechanism, a device, or remnants of something more complex. Maya met his eyes. She could tell he didn't believe his own words. Malik wasn't afraid to chase the truth, but even he wasn't prepared for truths that rewrote the human story entirely. A guard rushed into the tent, panting. "Dr. Malik, you need to see this." They followed him outside and around the excavation pit. The guard pointed to a cluster of stones near the edge of the site. Strange patterns etched the surface line's arcs and intersecting curves, forming a sequence that repeated in a spiral. Each cluster of symbols had been exposed overnight, as if the shifting wind had cleared the sand intentionally. Maya knelt down, brushing the grains aside. "These weren't here yesterday." "They were," Leora whispered. "We just didn't recognize them. The symbols change depending on the angle of the sun. They only appear at sunrise." Malik studied the carvings, his chest tightening. The symbols weren't random, they mirrored the tapping sequence. 3 clusters repeated the same interval spacing. Someone recorded their language in the rock. The desert wind answered with a dry hiss. A radio crackled suddenly at Malik's hip. Dr. Malik movement detected inside the chamber. They sprinted to the pit. 2 guards were staring uneasily at the monitors. The seismic sensors showed a pulse brief, sharp, regular. Tap, pause, tap tap, longer pause, tap. Malik steadied himself and grabbed a rope harness. "Lower me down." Maya grabbed his arm. "No, we have no idea what's down there. That's exactly why I'm going. You're not going alone," Leora said firmly, strapping another harness around her waist. Maya looked between them, torn by fear and duty, then tightened a 3rd harness around herself. "If you both go, I go." Malik wanted to protest, but they were already attaching the line. The guards hesitated at the edge. "Sir, if anything happens, pull us up," Malik said, "even if you have to drag us." The winch hummed, lowering them slowly into the darkness. The walls of the pit floated upward, turning from sunlit gold to shadowed brown to black. When their boots touched the chamber entrance, the air felt different, dense, cold, charged. The ancient stone doorway loomed before them. Malik raised his flashlight. Maya spoke first. "It's open." The chamber door, which had been sealed solid, now stood cracked, a narrow fissure running from top to bottom. Dust circled around the gap, pulled inward by a faint draft. "Something shifted it," Leora murmured. "Or someone," Malik replied. They entered. Inside, the chamber was nearly silent, but the silence had weight, alive, listening. Their flashlights swept across the carved walls, the skeletal remains, the spiral inscriptions. Malik stepped closer to the far wall where the tapping had seemed to originate. Then he froze. Fresh dust had collected in patterns on the floor, trails, arcs, depressions that looked like footprints but too large, too elongated, too anatomically impossible to belong to any known human species. Maya's voice trembled. "They can't be real," Leora whispered. "Something walked here last night." Malik knelt, touching the indentations. The dust crumbled like ash between his fingers. Before he could stand, a soft tap sounded behind him. They spun around. At the far end of the chamber stood a figure, or the suggestion of one, a silhouette carved from shadow. It was tall, thin, its limbs impossibly long, its head shaped exactly like the reconstructed skull on their table. Not flesh, more like dust given form by the low light flickering through the crack in the doorway. For a moment it didn't move, then it tapped its elongated hand against the stone wall. Tap, pause, tap tap, pause, tap. The pattern, the same ancient sequence. Maya whispered, "Malik, it's trying to communicate." The figure shifted, not stepping toward them, but turning slightly, as if bidding them to follow. It drifted toward the far wall, then dissolved its form, collapsing into dust that settled silently onto the floor. But the wall behind it now glowed faintly, revealing something they had never seen in any excavation. A second doorway, buried for millennia behind stone and sand. Malik felt his heart race. They hid something deeper. The chamber trembled gently. Dust rained from the ceiling. "The seismic readings," Leora said urgently. "That wasn't movement. That was activation." "Activation of what?" Maya asked. Malik stepped toward the glowing doorway. A memory. He pressed his hand against a faint outline. The stone crumbled inward, releasing a cold gust of air that smelled of minerals and ages untouched. Beyond the threshold lay a descending tunnel lined with carvings more detailed than anything in the upper chamber. Scenes of tall, slender beings interacting with early humans, sharing tools, sharing fire, teaching. Then the scenes turned darker: conflict, fear, isolation. The tall beings retreating underground, hiding, sealing themselves away. And finally, the last carving, a warning symbol, a spiral crossed with a single diagonal slash. The pattern, the same ancient sequence. Maya whispered, "Malik, it's trying to communicate." The figure shifted, not stepping toward them, but turning slightly, as if bidding them to follow. It drifted toward the far wall, then dissolved its form, collapsing into dust that settled silently onto the floor. But the wall behind it now glowed faintly, revealing something they had never seen in any excavation. A second doorway, buried for millennia behind stone and sand. Malik felt his heart race. They hid something deeper. The chamber trembled gently. Dust rained from the ceiling. "The seismic readings," Leora said urgently. "That wasn't movement. That was activation." "Activation of what?" Maya asked. Malik stepped toward the glowing doorway. "A memory." He pressed his hand against a faint outline. The stone crumbled inward, releasing a cold gust of air that smelled of minerals and ages untouched. Beyond the threshold lay a descending tunnel lined with carvings more detailed than anything in the upper chamber. Scenes of tall, slender beings interacting with early humans, sharing tools, sharing fire, teaching. Then the scenes turned darker: conflict, fear, isolation. The tall beings retreating underground, hiding, sealing themselves away. And finally, the last carving, a warning symbol, a spiral crossed with a single diagonal slash. "They didn't go extinct," Maya whispered. "They hid from us." Leora stepped closer. Why would a species hide from another? Malik read the final lines of the carving slowly, tracing with his fingertip. "Because they believed we would destroy them." Silence filled the tunnel. Not just silence, the heavy, tangible presence of truth. Malik swallowed hard. "They remembered us, and we forgot them," Maya finished softly. Another faint tremor pulsed beneath their feet. "Stronger this time." "We should go," Leora said. "Now." But Malik lingered, staring deeper into the tunnel. Beyond the carvings, the passage curved into darkness. Something faint glowed near the bender, pale, pulsing light, like the heartbeat of the earth. Maya tugged his arm. "Malik, please, this structure is unstable." But Malik didn't move. His voice came out low, reverent. "This changes everything we know about early humans, about our evolution, our history, our morality." The tremor hit again, harder. "Malik," Maya shouted. He stepped back just as a section of the ceiling cracked. A cloud of dust exploded downward. The three of them staggered out of the tunnel, coughing, stumbling over bones and rubble. The chamber roared behind them as stone collapsed inward. They sprinted through the cracked doorway and into the open pit. Guards pulled them up with frantic urgency as the earth below shook violently. The chamber, the tunnel, the carvings, all of it, disappeared beneath falling stone. When they reached the surface, the tremors ceased abruptly. The desert returned to silence. The excavation pit was now sealed beneath tons of collapsed earth, hiding once more the secrets it had briefly revealed. Malik stared into the pit with hollow eyes. "We found them," he whispered. Maya touched his shoulder. "And they found us." Leora stepped beside them, her voice barely audible. "Now the question is, did they want to be found?" Malik didn't answer, because deep beneath the collapsed chamber, faint and rhythmic, a familiar tapping began again. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, like a pulse waiting to return, like a memory refusing to die, like a species whispering from the dark.